recursive mode, meaning that I have to make a change for it to move into its next state. And so it's not going to get completely out of control. If I put it into a continual recursive mode, you can see that it's starting to become more and more agitated because it's taking that random, well, it's not random, but that altered data and it's feeding it back on itself. So if you think of it in terms of the first time that it occurs, you have a point in space and it's moved over by 1. The next time it occurs, it's moved over by 2. And then the next time by 3, etc. It eventually becomes too chaotic to really contain. But part of that is that this can then become a behavior. And so if I know that as I start to exceed a specific threshold, I'm going to move into a much more agitated state. As a performer, there's ways of taking, well, I mean, not even a performer, just in terms of interactivity, there's ways of taking audience input and keeping things right at those thresholds, or making it so that as somebody moves through a specific part of the space, that's what actually causes it to move past that threshold. And so it's, we can, as we create these systems, get a pretty good idea of what kinds of parameter sets are going to create behavior that's too chaotic to contain, and what's going to create a something that's chaotic enough that you can contain it, but is going to allow you as a performer to be able to respond to something that's not just you, something that's a little bit outside of you. So that comes back to the idea of autonomy. Even though we know that we're setting up a system, and if I perform a certain set of actions, I'm going to get to this basic state. This basic state also has within it latent possibilities to move off into a direction that I'm not necessarily directing it to go in. I know that it's got the potential to go there, and so I can set up a state where it may diverge into a number of different pathways. And so in terms of performance, that allows you to respond. It's like having another player in the room. And in terms of an installation, it allows for an emergent possibility in the installation environment. You as the artist don't necessarily know where it's going, and certainly the audience doesn't always know what the next step is.
That was nice. Can you do that again?
It's unlikely. But in this case, I'm not working with such an outrageous parameter set that it's impossible. There's a good chance that I can get back to something very similar to this.
Looks like an apple and brew.
It does.
Trademark. Very good.
Can you have two of those objects going at once so they can relate to each other?
The answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, this is in the performance work that we do. I basically have four pages of this kind of stuff, this kind of stuff full to the last little bit of pixel resolution that we have available, and that's allowing us to have multiple objects with dynamic relationships, sonification, individual specialized feedback, so that you don't have to have two forms running the same kind of processing. And so yes is the answer, absolutely. This is just intended for me to be able to mine kind of the behavior of this specific form of feedback. And so a lot of the other things that we use, the sonification controls and stuff, aren't really included in this right here.
I want to throw out that David and I were talking yesterday before this, and one of the things that I think is fascinating from my studies of art history is from the late 19th century, when artists were interested in evolutionary ideas and architects and designers. Part of that was what I talked about tonight, but there's a part that I didn't write in my book, which is the chapter on the fourth dimension and cosmic consciousness as this evolution of the mind into new realms of space, which was part and parcel of this discourse among artists. And it seems like when I watch some of what you're doing right now, Corey, it kind of morphs into cubist forms, which in my mind is very much about the fourth dimension and this cosmic vision of the space that's beyond. And I think it'd be really fascinating to have another meeting and discussion to talk about the fourth dimension, time, cosmic consciousness, and this vision of some sort of evolved reality in a metaphorical or more literal sense. So.
Absolutely, I think that'd be a great discussion. I actually meant to start with this form here because it exhibits a lot of the properties of the kind of traditional video feedback. I'm going to actually slide over the image that shows the matrix describing the form. So this is the original form, the plane itself, and then this is the actual matrix that's showing kind of the feedback. And so this is, as I start to increase this, we'll start to see the feedback take effect. And so you can see the 3D form here is absolutely mimicking what we're seeing happening in the 2D representation of the matrix there. And it's a much more traditional kind of video feedback. You've got this kind of mandala pattern forming in the middle, which if we take out the feedback, we'll be able to watch form again here. But when you apply that to a more complex form, it's not just a two-dimensional form here, something like a sphere, and take out the feedback so you can get it back on. And I'll go ahead and render it as a solid so you can really see what's happening.
Can you slow it down?
That's a function of feedback, so I'll give it a shot.
Can you rotate that in 3D, Corey, while it's moving?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you put any texture down on it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, you can do anything from live camera to a movie to, you could actually use the matrix that describes the form itself. Let's see if I can just do it real quick here. Okay, so now I'm actually using the little 3D matrix, I mean the two-dimensional matrix that's describing the form as the surface texture. So yeah, absolutely. It's
This one you could sell right to Hollywood or advertising. This is great. You've got your funding all set up with this.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. A lot of the more eugenic forms, when we start crossbreeding them in sort of random ways, we get a lot of things that would make incredible logos that are very streamlined designer logos. And they come directly out of just throwing a whole bunch of these different equations together.
Or any number of other things. I mean, we joke about going into virtual manufacturing and manufacturing objects to sell to video game producers.
Yeah, I mean,
Keep
there's
cracking.
there's
Someone else will make their $1 million off it.
a huge variety just in working with something like a sphere. And so
I
I
like
guess
these.
the point in showing this feedback stuff is that a lot of our process as artists is about exploring new territory. It's about setting up something that lets us, it's not about knowing what we're going to get out of it, it's about creating a tool set that informs you as the artist. And so it is actually not just doing feedback, but it's a feedback mechanism for us in terms of creating the work. We create something that has potential that we can't be completely aware of. And as we start to mine it for its potential, it informs us what kinds of other directions we might want to take that are interesting. And that's, for me, it's something really new in working in this kind of a modality of computers. A lot of my experience before working in generative stuff with computers was kind of the opposite. I felt very templated. It told me exactly how to proceed. I grew up playing video games, not working with computers. And my experience working with computers was often much more like a video game that's scrolling from one side to the other and you have to jump at the right moment. And so working in this kind of terrain as an artist, it feels, well, you're being informed by the designs that you're actually creating. And so it's, for me, much more interesting. It has kind of an infinite possibility, and it does lead me to want to create the ultimate refrigerator over and over again.
But different every time.
Absolutely.
I suppose you could wire a refrigerator and show this kind of pattern in its front surface for you to look at all the time. I mean, a continuously spontaneous pattern.
Are there any other questions about anything that we talked about for either Christina or Corey and I?
I remember when I was a kid, I used to take a video camera and aim it at a television, and you could tilt it, and you get these unbelievable.
That's
Mandalas.
exactly
what
what
we're
I'm
doing.
doing here. I've taken a 3D form and I'm tilting it by 5 degrees every iteration.
Oh, okay.
Like that.
So it's very similar to that. Huh?
Mhm.